In 1859, Charles Darwin published his book called The Origin of Species, which laid out his theory of evolution by natural selection. Quite simply, organisms change over long periods of time in response to their environment. Genetic variation causes slight differences within each new generation of a species. You are not a perfect copy of your parents.
Well, good for you, you're wrong.
Often, this variation does nothing, but sometimes it might just give that creature a small advantage. Perhaps the environment changes and there is not enough food for the species. A creature that was born with a genetic variation that made it smaller than others will then need less food. Because food is now scarce, that smaller creature has a better chance of surviving, reproducing, and passing on that smaller gene to its offspring. Over time, natural selection like this will begin to favor members of the species that are better suited to their new environment. Given enough time, these changes can result in entirely new species forming. This is evolution. Every generation is classed as the same species as its parents, but over the course of millions of years, these tiny, gradual changes do add up in a very big way. This process affects every living thing on the planet, including humans. In a century and a half since Darwin's book, many people still ask, did humans evolve from apes? My name is Danny Berg. Let's find out the answer, and also why that might not even be the right question, here on Life's Biggest Questions. One of the biggest misconceptions is that humans evolved from modern apes. The thing is, we are apes. Along with orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and many other subspecies, we make up the ape family. So, if we didn't evolve from apes, where did we evolve from? Well, all species in the ape family share a common ape-like ancestor. Essentially, chimps, gorillas, and orangutans are our genetic cousins, and this common ancestor is like the great-great-great-grandparent of all of us. We know this because, for example, we share almost 99% of our genetic sequence with our closest relative, chimpanzees. There are now thousands of fossils that chronicle each split and progression from that single common ancestor that lived in Africa to all the modern apes we see today, including us. This single species began to split towards all these different groups as far back as 17 million years ago. The group that included human ancestors first split away from the group that would evolve into gibbons, then they split away from orangutan ancestors, then gorillas ancestors, and then finally, about 7 million years ago, a very important split happened. One group became the ancestors of modern day chimpanzees and bonobos, and the other started doing something very human-like. They started walking on two legs. This trait is known as being bipedal, making this branch a lot more human-like. So, why did this happen? Well, if you remember at the start of the video, we talked about how evolution is stimulated by environmental change. And for this distant ancestor of ours living in Africa all those millions of years ago, their environment certainly did change. They lived in the trees of dense rainforests that were rapidly disappearing due to natural climate change as the planet got cooler and drier. Out on the new African savanna with no trees to climb for protection, our ancestors needed to run from predators. There's also some evidence to suggest that if you're not swinging between trees, walking on two legs uses less energy than knuckle walking on four, another advantage for our ancestors. It's hotly debated among anthropologists about when exactly the first true upright walker lived, but the one that everyone can agree on is that a species known as Australopithecus regularly walked upright about 4 million years ago. But other than walking upright, Australopithecus still weren't very human-like. They had small brains, were mainly herbivores, and couldn't speak. We know this by studying fossils, such as one of the most famous fossils of all time, an Australopithecus named Lucy, found in 1974. She was named after the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds that was playing at the dig site. But evolution is a relentless process. Things continue to change, and about 2.5 million years ago, the fossil records tell us that a new species had emerged, Homo habilis. If you think the first part of that sounds familiar, then you might be thinking of Homo sapiens, better known as us, humans. That's no accident either. At the moment, they're regarded as the first member of the Homo family, and all subsequent members are notably more human-like than anything before Homo habilis. Homo habilis had smaller teeth and a smaller jaw, much closer to ours. Their hands were more similar too, and with these human-like hands and bigger brains, they did something that none before them had. They made tools. Their name, Homo habilis, literally means handyman because of this. Then came Homo erectus about 1.8 million years ago. Although they still had protruding jaws, thick brows, and no chin, they were even closer to us humans with their larger brains and skeletons that were now perfect for full-time bipedal walking. And walk they did, as Homo erectus is widely regarded as the first to boldly go where none had gone before and leave Africa. They crossed out into Southeast and East Asia, reaching India and China too, possibly following their hunting prey with their new improved tools and weapons. Homo erectus is also thought to have started intentionally using fire for the first time, for warmth, protection, and most importantly, to cook their food. Cooking food releases far more calories in that food, and with all these spare calories, over time, this led to a growth in brain size. Over the next million years, these humanoids began to split into smaller distinct groups, such as Homo heidelbergensis, who were thought to be the first species to bury their dead and also use very primitive language. They were very successful, and their advanced hunting tools and more complex social interactions helped them spread into Europe, where they gradually evolved into Neanderthals, and into Asia, where they became Denisovans. At this point, there were now a number of different humanoid groups living on the planet, coexisting for many thousands of years. And then, 130,000 years ago, the African population of Homo heidelbergensis had evolved into Homo sapiens, who are the direct precursors to Homo sapiens sapiens, otherwise known as us, humans. If you look at the skeletons of these genetic cousins of ours, they almost seem indistinguishable to modern day humans, but there were differences between them. They were shorter and stockier than most humans, an adaptation to the cold weather in the northern hemisphere at that time. But in other ways, they were remarkably similar to us, and not the loutish cavemen popularized in the mainstream media over the years. They used complex tools, buried their dead, and likely had speech and language closer to ours than the grunts of Homo heidelbergensis. And then, 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other Homo groups began to disappear from the fossil records, until the only ones left on the planet were us. So what happened? Did they all just die out? Well, yes, no, and we really don't know. At that time, the climate was fluctuating rapidly across the world, going from mild to freezing cold every few generations or less. The Neanderthals were already scattered into small, isolated groups when humans arrived on the scene. Humans had spent a while building up their numbers in Africa, allowing them to form complex social groups where they could quickly gain and share knowledge. This gave us a number of slight advantages over Neanderthals, and we developed better tools, more complex languages, intricate art to communicate between groups and across generations. The unforgiving climate and these behavioral differences, rather than physical, meant that humans began to move into the areas of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other hominids and begin to outcompete them to extinction. But our genetic cousins aren't completely gone. Before humans outlasted them, they interbred with them. These days, studies have found that about 4% of many humans' DNA is Neanderthal, Denisovan, or even other, as of yet unidentified humanoid species. So for a lot of humans today, these weren't just groups that existed alongside our ancestors, they are also our ancestors in a very real way, living on within our DNA. And so too is the DNA of all who came before us. From Homo erectus to Australopithecus to our common ancestor with chimpanzees some 7 million years ago, and the ancestor of all modern apes 17 million years ago. We did not evolve from modern apes of today. We share a common ancestor. We are still trying to piece together the puzzle of our family history that goes back all those millions of years. New discoveries are being made all the time in both genetics and archaeology that mean our understanding of human evolution changes as often as 1 year to the next as we fill in the blanks in our history. Still, there is so much left to understand about us, the hairless apes that climbed down from the trees and learned to walk, talk, create, and ask some of life's biggest questions.
In our 200,000 years on this planet, Homo sapiens have drastically changed the face of Earth. We consume, we build, and we kill in the process. But have you ever wondered just how much humans have affected planet Earth? Today, Life's Biggest Questions asks, what if humans never existed? Hello and welcome back to LBQ. I'm Charlotte Dobre. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and let us know in the comments a question you have always wanted to know the answer to. Firstly, let's look at what animals would still be around if humans had never existed. According to a study published in the journal Diversity and Distributions, mammal diversity in Europe would have looked much like the diversity we see today in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly the region known as the Serengeti. The Serengeti is located in northern Tanzania and reaches all the way to southwestern Kenya. There remains vast animal faunas in this area of Africa because there are protected areas there. If it weren't for modern humans, many of the animals you would see on a safari in Africa would be present in Europe as well. There might very well be elephants and rhinos roaming around Italy. And of course, animals like the dodo bird, the Tasmanian tiger, and the woolly mammoth, specifically, might be still around if it weren't for humans. At the end of the Pleistocene era, there was a dramatic shift in climate on Earth. This was known as the Ice Age, but most experts believe that this shift would not have been enough to kill off these large mammals all by itself. Humans are mostly to blame. Yes, Europe would have giant sloths, herds of wild horses, bears, saber-toothed cats, and mastodons. Europe is not the only place that would have a wide variety of animals. Brazil, Argentina, and Texas would as well. There would be gigantic ground sloths running around North America. Yes, you heard me, ground sloths. If it weren't for humans, North and South America would be even more biologically diverse than Africa. Essentially, without us, the Earth would be like one gigantic zoo. Furthermore, experts agree that Homo sapiens actually wiped out our cousins, Neanderthals. If humans have never existed, Neanderthals might have taken their place. Neanderthals, despite their bad rep, were not the brutish cavemen we're familiar with that's perpetuated in the media. Neanderthals were actually quite intelligent. The exact reason why Neanderthals went extinct is still debated, but generally the two main hypotheses for their disappearance is humans wiped them out, and we began interbreeding with them. So without humans, Neanderthals might have been the dominant species on planet Earth. Maybe they would have gone on to form complex civilizations and cultures. Now let's look at the environment. If humans had never existed, there would be a heck of a lot more trees. 3 to 6 billion trees are cut down every year. The Amazon rainforest would be a lot more lush than it is now. Almost 80% of the Earth has been changed by humans. If we never existed, there would be a lot less garbage, no buildings or infrastructure, no pollutions, no hole in the ozone layer, and the Great Barrier Reef would still be intact. Of course, humans aren't the only force that drives climate change. The climate has changed many times over the course of the history of our planet, but human influence is driving the climate change we are currently seeing. If we don't change our ways and change them soon, future generations will not get to experience the majesty of the Great Barrier Reef, the Dead Sea, or the Amazon rainforest. Many experts believe that in our lifetimes, the oceans will be almost completely devoid of life. Coastlines will move inward because of rising temperatures and melting ice caps. Definitely something to think about. What do you think the world would be like if humans never existed? Let us know in those comments.
Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. I'm Ron Mackenzie Lafergie. A billion years ago, our distant ancestors left the ocean and began the adventure of life on land. But as sea levels rise and natural disasters become more prevalent and dangerous, it may be that we'll be bobbing along at the bottom of the beautiful briny sea before long. What would happen if the land were to become uninhabitable and we were forced to live underwater? Let's explore. What if humans had to live underwater? Well, first of all, we would need to find a way to actually survive underwater. This would require underwater environments to be built. Now, all this construction would take time, and if land became uninhabitable all of a sudden, these things couldn't be built in time. So for the purposes of this video, we'll assume that humanity had some time to prepare. While technology does exist today to make small underwater enclosures, such as the Aquarius Reef Base in Florida, these would only support small populations, up to 100 people. We would require significant technological upgrades if we wanted to hold more than that. We would need to develop ways to get enough fresh air to let everyone breathe, as well as sustainable sources of energy. One promising technology is planned to be used in the ocean spiral, a planned deep-sea city in Japan that intends to use a power generator dependent on temperature difference in water to generate power. However, this city, which would depend on desalinated water and underwater farms, has an estimated cost of $26 billion, and it would house only 5,000 people. Of course, it would take a long time to build enough biodomes to support all of human life, and frankly, it may not even be feasible. These habitats would need to be exceptionally large to allow not only for living space for billions of people, but also space for all the necessary equipment to survive underwater. As you may guess, this doesn't sound like something that we could achieve, especially when it comes to poorer countries. This means that we might see large portions of humanity wiped off the planet, both from developed and developing countries. For those that were able to build and have their own home underwater, life would be vastly different than what we're used to. Most of their time would be spent in very cramped quarters. If you think being deployed on a submarine for a year sounds bad, imagine how claustrophobic you'd feel if you spent basically your whole life there. Sure, it beats dying, but to some, it might be a close contest. Now, one question that springs to mind is whether we would somehow evolve to thrive underwater. This is the kind of thing you see in depictions of Atlantis, where the people evolved to actually live in the water rather than in man-made habitats. This is unlikely. The thing is, evolution by natural selection, the process by which we would evolve, requires selection pressure. A random mutation needs to be advantageous when it comes to reproduction in order for it to become a selected trait. However, in a world where most of our problems would be solved by technology, there wouldn't really be a need for biological mutations. Plus, even if we did find ourselves in an environment with selection pressures where such mutations were advantageous, this stuff takes a long time and is done through gradual steps. It's far more likely that we will have altered ourselves through technology by that time than it is that we'd evolve naturally. But that brings me to our next point. Setting aside the high-tech biodomes and transportation, how might we improve ourselves to better thrive underwater? Well, even today, genetic engineering is becoming more and more advanced. It's possible that years from now, we will be able to modify the genome not only to prevent defects, but to actually change the way our body works. Perhaps we would gain the ability to withstand the cold and pressure of deep sea, see in the dark, or even breathe underwater. Would these things be necessary given our level of technology? Not really. However, they could be a good failsafe in case there was a need to evacuate the habitat. And now we return to our question, what if humans had to live underwater? Well, we would be highly dependent on technology to provide food, water, shelter, and pretty much every aspect of human life. This would be highly resource intensive and likely would only be able to house a small portion of Earth's population. It's also possible that we could genetically engineer humanity to better survive underwater. This may not seem so great, but on the bright side, I hear from a very reliable source that it is actually better down where it's wetter, under the sea. And if Sebastian doesn't know what he's talking about, I don't know who does.
Thanos snapping twice. Mass alien abduction. A weird wormhole taking us all on a wild ride around the galaxy for exactly 12 months. All possible explanations behind all of humanity disappearing for a year. I'm sure there are plenty more reasons we could get up and go for a 52-week period, but I won't get into that right now. You're more than welcome to down in the comments though. I'm sure we've all contemplated this idea at some point. What if we just weren't here? It's worth considering. I think part of being human is thinking about the implications of our existence, and of course, the lack thereof. If we never existed, the world would definitely be a different place. But now that we've been around for a while, what would happen if we popped out of reality for a little bit? Not forever, mind you, because that would leave no room for us to see the results of our non-being. No. What we'll ask today involves a temporary vacation from the mortal coil. Hello, fellow friends and philosophers, and welcome back to the most mind-bending channel on YouTube. I'm your voice in the void, Keegan Hughes, and today we're going to be asking the following question. What would happen if humans disappeared for 1 year? Before we get started, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more existential inquiries. Perfect, let's begin. I suppose we have to consider two things right off the bat. 1, what would happen during the year we aren't around? 2, what would we do when we came back? There are plenty more questions to be asked, like where would we actually go? Or would we age during our time away? Or would we even be aware of our own disappearance? Is it limbo, purgatory, the shadow realm? But hey, that's less concrete than anything I'll follow up with. I'll leave those questions to the sci-fi writers of the world. There isn't a single place on Earth that human beings haven't stuck their grubby little fingers. We've colonized just about every landmass, explored every jungle, mountain, and ocean, and built monuments in every picturesque location. Without humans to monitor all this for a full 365, a lot would change pretty quickly. The first major change I want to address is infrastructure. Humans have made it possible to live comfortably just about anywhere through the magic of technology. Central heating, electricity, the shipping of goods. It's pretty wild when you think about all the normal things that would totally fall apart if not expertly managed. First of all, when all humans disappeared, all energy generation would stop. Power plants would go dark with nobody to keep them going. Nuclear plants would likely undergo catastrophic meltdowns after cooling systems failed. That'll be fun to deal with upon our return. Without people to work drainage pumps, subways and cities would flood. Streets would become rivers full of all the junk that tends to drift around in urban areas. Buildings would have a rough go of it too. Structures made of concrete would actually be alright for a year, but give it a few more and you'd start to see major breakdowns. However, anything largely made of wood would be way worse off. With nobody around to do maintenance and to prevent fires from spreading, a lot of buildings could fall apart. Mold, pests, and unforeseen blazes could claim all sorts of structures, especially in areas where plenty are close together. It's a good thing nobody's inside, I guess. 1 year isn't too long of a time though, so most structures would look more or less the same when we got back. However, anything housing potentially volatile materials that need some sort of maintenance in order not to explode or catch fire would be out of luck. The next major issue would have to do with animals. Although many species have lived happily without human intervention, there are plenty that have adapted to live with us. Pets would be totally screwed unless they found a way to make it outside whatever abode they were kept in. It's tragic, but domesticated animals like dogs and cats would likely starve. This is true for pet birds, rodents, fish, and more. However, the feral versions of these creatures would have run of these streets. For a while anyways. We humans made all sorts of environments more easily survivable for many creatures through our excessive use of heat in the winter and often through the generation of waste. Rats and cockroaches would not have a good time eking out a living once our dirty disappear. How can they expect to find food and warmth and shelter without humans? Livestock would roam free for a bit, provided they were free range and not kept in cages. Those trapped ones are cooked though, unfortunately. But without farmers to feed them, it wouldn't be long before their populations were massively reduced. Add in the free-roaming predatory animals now having access to everything without the threat of a double-barrel wielding farmhand, and cows, chickens, and other barnyard beasts might be clucking their last. It's also possible that animals that were previously non-native to certain areas will find new niches to fill. We've seen how fast an invasive species can take over in a new environment, and without humans there to regulate the spread, it could be a whole new ballgame for some. Especially considering the fact that people have brought all sorts of exotic animals to new places for zoos and research and unlawful pet ownership, so we could very well see crocodiles take over New York, or maybe some gorillas crashing through the Albertan forests. Yet another fun surprise for when we finally make it back. A lot of folks assume that the environment would just take care of itself with humans gone. This is essentially true, but it wouldn't fix itself as fast as many would think. 1 year really wouldn't make a big difference in terms of healing from the pollution we've introduced to the planet. It would take thousands of years for carbon in the atmosphere to return to pre-human levels. Ditto for all the pollutants in our waterways. And don't even get me started on plastics. Those will still be around when humans actually do go extinct. In fact, when the year was up, we'd probably come back to a more polluted world thanks to all the stuff that would burn unregulated. Gotta love a year-long tire fire, hey? A lot would happen in a year, but it's still a relatively short time if you're expecting major changes. However, a lot would have to be dealt with upon our return. That's where things get interesting. If everyone just popped back up 1 year post-disappearance, we'd have a lot of problems on our hands. Firstly, the world would not be able to support everyone. A whole year without cultivating food means that there would be a scramble to find non-perishables and get the nourishment flowing once again. We'd have to gather all sorts of farm animals and start sowing seeds ASAP. The thing is, all of the systems we had in place before to keep these things going smoothly would be totally out of commission. Sure, agrarian folks wouldn't have too rough a time, but the large-scale industrial ordeals we had running before would have totally ground to a halt. Add in the very likely destroyed energy generation technology, and city centers being partially submerged, and you've got yourself a wicked post-apocalyptic scenario on your hands. It would be chaos. I kind of imagine it being like Fallout, with all sorts of folks emerging from their bunkers. Instead of emerging from their bunkers, we'd be emerging from non-existence. Everything's irradiated, food is hard to come by, everyone's pissed off and killing each other for resources, society's donezo. Politeness and cordial behavior are out the window. Now it's every person for themselves. At least things would be very interesting for a little while. The whole world would be in a position where starting over is an option. New leaders would emerge as the systems we have in place now likely wouldn't hold up. Gone would be the days of political platitudes. I think a Mad Max style world order should arise. Trials by fire, leadership by literal strength. Whoever's got the craziest jacket/hairdo combo. Those who have the most resources and firepower can take control of the wastes. And thankfully, the wastes don't have to stay wasted for too long. Sure, the nuclear meltdowns would create a bunch of little Chernobyls, but we'd work our way around that. As long as people come back and don't immediately try to pick up where we left off, I think there's opportunity for a more interesting future. Leave the systems of the past behind and start fresh. What better opportunity than right after a hard reset? It's like making a major life change post-vacation.
Fire exists in nature. That much we know. But the moment where a human figured out how to create fire completely changed everything for our species. In fact, if humans hadn't discovered how to create fire, practically everything throughout the course of history would have changed, or maybe even not have happened at all. Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. I'm Charlotte Dobre. Don't forget to like and subscribe and let us know in those comments below a question you have always wanted to know the answer to. To understand what human life might be like if we never discovered how to create fire, we've got to go to an island in the Bay of Bengal, North Sentinel Island. The tribe that lives on North Sentinel Island have not figured out how to create fire. Yes, they still use fire, but they have to wait for lightning to strike on the island. Then they simply keep the embers lit as long as possible until lightning strikes again. The North Sentinels live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and they avoid contact with the outside world, and even other local tribes. Life for the North Sentinelese has not changed much in 60,000 years. They're completely untouched by civilization. This can give us some insight into what life would be like for humans if we had never mastered fire. Around 1.8 million years ago, hominids began to experience a growth in brain size. This, of course, was not by accident. It was because hominids began consuming more calories. The first encounter that early humans had with fire probably came after some sort of lightning storm or wildfire. The food that became cooked by the fire was found and tried, and it was likely a lot more appetizing than raw food, and when Homo erectus figured that out, they probably wanted to replicate it. They then took the embers of old fires and sheltered them from rain. The exact time that humans mastered fire is debated among anthropologists. Some say it happened around 600,000 years ago, others say 300,000, and others 125,000 years ago. Evidence of charred bones and primitive stone tools in a cave in South Africa suggests that some of our ancestors figured out how to master fire around 1 million years ago. Regardless of whether or not humans could create fire, they still used it for cooking by keeping old embers lit as long as possible. Creating fire meant being able to cook, which was the real breakthrough. Being able to cook meant being able to consume more different types of food, which led to better nutrition and calorie intake. This led to the advancement of the brain in Homo sapiens. Cooking food also meant less bacteria and fewer diseases, which in turn meant that humans lived longer. If it weren't for fire, our entire species might not even exist, but if we did find a way to evolve, we would likely still be living in the Stone Age. To make many different types of ancient tools and weapons, early man needed fire. Ancient spears were found to have been fire hardened. Creating spears meant that humans changed the way they hunted. Fire also creates warmth. It can be said that fire took away our need to keep our bodies warm with hair. Perhaps humans that lived further away from the equator where it was colder would have evolved differently. Then there's also the thought that perhaps humans would not have ventured to colder climates had they not found a way to create fire. Fire allowed humans to travel and settle in colder climates because it meant that they could follow a herd of animals, hunt them, then return to a campfire to warm up and seek shelter at night. Fire led to the creation of larger settlements and cultural advancements. Humans began to be more social. They began to gather around fire and create base campsites. Animals were afraid of fire, so having a fire close by was a good way to ward off predators. Hominids also discovered that meat could be dried using fire, and could then have been preserved for times when meat was scarce. Fire was also used to create art, and a society with art means that that society is a society with culture. Clay pottery and statues are just a couple examples. The earliest discovery of pottery was from 20,000 years ago in China. In short, modern civilization would not exist without the ability to control fire.
What if humans came from another planet? Make sure you hit that subscribe button as well as that bell, and drop us some comments below with other questions you'd like answered on here. So we call Earth home because, well, that's exactly what it is. It's all we know. It's where we spent our entire lives. Unless you're an astronaut, but assuming you're not, you've been on Earth since the day you were born, and most likely will be till the day you die. But what if our ancestors actually migrated here? What if they were from another planet? Maybe Mars, for example. Now, I know it sounds crazy and really far-fetched, but there are actually some claims here that may make you think twice as to whether or not Earth really is where the human race evolved. Let's look at some of these factors that play into the idea that maybe the human race hasn't always called Earth home. Dr. Ellis Silver, a researcher and author of the book Humans Are Not From Earth, it's kind of funny, made some bold claims that really do seem to have some merit. One of those claims, humans are much more sensitive to the sun compared to other animals, such as lizards for example. As humans, we can't stay in the sun too long. It could burn our skin, cause heat stroke, even cause us to fall victim to disease such as skin cancer, among others. Reptiles, on the other hand, use the sun to regulate their temperatures. They rely on it much more than we do. Another interesting theory is that humans also suffer from wider ranges of ailments compared to other animals in general. Silver explained, I quote, "We are all chronically ill. Indeed, if you could find a single person who is 100% fit and healthy and not suffering from some perhaps hidden or unstated condition or disorder, I would be extremely surprised. I have not been able to find anyone." Another example Silver points out is that many humans suffer from chronic back pain. This could be due to the fact that, as a species, we evolved from a planet with much lower gravity. And although I'm personally a believer of Darwin's theory of evolution, my guy Silver seems to raise some interesting points here. There's also been the recent discovery of water on Mars, which raises more questions regarding intelligent life once inhabiting that planet. Is it possible that humans originally came from Mars and then migrated to Earth? It seems we only know things about the past based off of evidence such as fossils. So who's to say as we discover more about Mars, we don't find human-like fossils that could possibly confirm the theory that humans once inhabited that as our home planet? Of course, this is all hypothetical because we know what we know. It's as simple as that. We have fossils and historic evidence that proves our evolution on Earth. But is it possible these proven theories could change based on new evidence that comes out as the years go on? Although, like most, I won't say all, but most, I too do believe we started out on Earth, but let's just explore the idea that we came from another planet and talk about what that could mean for the future of mankind. Personally, I think it's very promising. Given the dangerous path in which we're headed toward with Earth's climate constantly rising, if In fact, we originated from another planet and we were able to create a society the way we did on Earth. Who's to say we can't do it all over again? Now, assuming somehow, some way, the human race was able to migrate to Earth from another planet, and I'm not talking about millions or even thousands of people, but let's just say for example 10 people. If 10 people were able to escape a planet somehow that was inevitably doomed, whether it was from war or climate change or whatever you want to say, and they were able to create a new life and society for mankind on what we now know as Earth, well, that's pretty damn impressive and exciting if you ask me. It seems we're also very focused on trying to find aliens or extraterrestrial life, when in reality, maybe we're what we've been looking for the whole time. Not to say we're tall, green, lanky figures with big heads and beady eyes. Well, at least most of us aren't. Maybe we've been looking for someone or something that's quite literally been in front of us the entire time. In a sense, I guess, under our noses. You guys get what I'm trying to say there. It's us. Now, as crazy as it sounds, everything sounds crazy until it's proven. They said humans would never be able to fly, and now there's millions worldwide boarding planes every day. Again, I'm not saying that I believe we're from another planet, but who am I to say we're not? I base my beliefs off of facts, and as of now, the facts that I know prove Darwin's theory of evolution that, yes, we evolved right here on Earth. But in 1,000 years, who knows what other information may come to light that could change everything we know about evolution.
While fossil evidence suggests we could be somewhat older than at first suspected, the generally accepted theory for evolution says that we began in Ethiopia roughly 200,000 years ago. From then, we evolved into what we are now, but the modern day humans of the early 21st century look very different to our early ancestors. But of course, without Instagram or even a humble oil painting, how do we even really know how different we looked? Hello and welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions, a channel now sitting pretty with over 1 million subscribers. Hip hip hooray. I'm your host Rebecca Felgate, and today I'm asking, what did humans really look like 200,000 years ago? Before we get into this video, I'm gonna ask you guys to let me know what you look like using emojis in the comments section down below. You can't see my face, but it's somewhere between the ginger and black-haired emoji, the frog face, and the lipstick pic. Also, while you're down there, why don't you guys leave a thumbs up on this video and share it with a friend. Thanks! These days humans come with lots of variants: light skin, dark skin, lightish skin, darkish skin, blonde, ginger, brunette, black haired, green eyes, blue eyes, brown, in some rare cases violet eyes, curly hair, straight hair, all the hairs. That was not always the case. 200,000 years ago, as humans were beginning to take form, there were 3 species of us: Homo sapiens, our modern ancestors, Homo erectus, and Neanderthals. While we bred amongst one another, the 3 species did look somewhat different. Thanks to found fossils and scientific knowledge as well as modern reconstruction technology, we have a rough idea of what our early ancestors looked like. Homo erectus, who was still around 200,000 years ago, looked least like we do today. They looked far more ape-like and were by all intent and purpose far more primitive and animalistic. The Homo erectus had large bodies and bigger brains than us, around 60% the volume that we do today, but of course it isn't size that matters, it's how we use it. The Homo erectus could be taller too, reaching nearing 6 foot, although the variants in the species were wider too. They had a lot of shorties as well. They had strong, dexterous hands, coarse hair, and very big noses, plus ape-like brow ridges. The Homo erectus were very dark-skinned, and they became extinct 70,000 years ago. Neanderthals had much lighter skin and were hairy. They had bigger-looking faces with wider facial features than humans today. Their noses were broad and projecting. Their chins were small. It is thought they had a prominent brow ridge. Their skulls were elongated. They had big jaws and space behind their wisdom teeth. It is thought that Neanderthals had straight and thick hair. It's also thought that their faces were rosy, their eyes were big, and their hands were wide. Neanderthals are thought to have been the origin bearers of red hair, having the same distribution of hair color as modern Eurasians. It is thought that Neanderthals were shorter than Homo sapiens, averaging 1.6 meters. Neanderthals were Homo sapiens' main competition, but they too died out 28,000 years ago. While Homo sapiens did mix with the other 2 early ancestors, they can be defined as being dark-skinned, leaner and more muscular, and much taller than us. The early Homo sapiens were the bringers of the more rounded skull. Our jaws were pretty wide and our noses were bigger, but nowhere near as big as Neanderthals and the Homo erectus. We know that Homo sapiens were the beginnings of intelligence, which is what helped our early ancestors survive and outlive the competition. With that intelligence, I imagine our early ancestors had a look of understanding in their eyes that Homo erectus and Neanderthals didn't quite. As time went on, humans got smaller. 9,000 years ago, we ditched our hunter-gatherer lifestyles and started agricultural farming, which shifted the ways that our body looks. Around 7,000 years ago were the first truly lighter-skinned humans. They began emerging. One of the biggest visual differences between us and our ancestors 200,000 years ago would be hair and dress. Back then, humans didn't worry about hairstyles, makeup, and flattering outfits. Hair was fully grown out on both males and females, and everything they wore was fit for purpose. Animal skins would have been worn to protect areas that needed protecting, and we probably would have looked pretty dirty, seeing as we spent much of our time outdoors or in rudimentary shelters. There weren't dentists or doctors to fix teeth and broken bones back then, so likely we would have looked pretty rugged. Humans would have looked more homogenized too. There wouldn't be fat and thin humans, just alive and functional. Genetically, we would be a lot closer to one another back then. Evolution has allowed for variation to flourish, although that being said, the establishment of countries and borders later re-encouraged less selective gene pools, but that's a whole different discussion.
Evolution, the driving force behind the building blocks of all manner of matter and the living, breathing, endless torrent of life finding its way amongst the cosmos. The truth of the matter is, evolution is a wonderfully unpredictable thing. It is relentless in its endless pursuit to propagate life, and ever since our distant amphibious ancestors crawled out of the primordial soup, our species of Homo sapien were the eventual victors of the hard-fought millennia-long battle towards sentience. Thankfully, we could stand on two legs, run really fast, make friends, and start a fire. The many benchmarks that our planet requires to kickstart a civilization. But unfortunately for us, in this hypothetical situation, we've just been swatted away by the unfathomable will of the universe. Goodbye, I guess. But either way, forget about that. Who's next? Let's find out. Hello internet, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the most inquisitive channel on YouTube, Life's Biggest Questions. As per usual, I'll be your disembodied floating voice, Jack Finch, as today we curiously ask the question, if humans went extinct, what would replace us? Obviously, the likeliest candidate to be the animal that replaced our species following a mass extinction event would be our closest relatives, and it doesn't really take that much imagination to perhaps envision a world similar to the Planet of the Apes series, where unless you're an unfortunate time-traveling human astronaut caught in a wormhole, there shouldn't be any concern for being rounded up, captured, and put in a cage by our new ape overlords, given the fact that, well, we'd already be dead. The fact of the matter is, humankind is the only current living hominid whose conservation status is not already endangered, or worse than that, critically endangered. Across the planet, the animal kingdom is under imminent threat from the ever-expanding megalith of human civilization, and the delicate environs and ecospheres that the likeliest contenders to inherit the Earth currently residing are under increasing amounts of pressure. In all likelihood, the kind of global crisis that would precede a mass extinction event of humanity would also wipe out pretty much every species on the planet, apes included. In fact, our bonobo and chimpanzee contenders would be just as likely to contract a population-destroying disease as we humans would be. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't many other choice contenders to perhaps take the next top spot for planet Earth's most dominant species. Obviously, for the sake of this hypothetical argument, we'll agree that there was no apocalyptic event that heralded our demise, and humanity just kind of disappeared overnight, not with a bang, but a whimper. Because then that leaves us with so many more options, and as they say, variety is the spice of life. But first we'll have to map out just exactly what it may take to clamber to the top of the evolutionary pile and detail the specific earthly requirements that precede it. If we use our own evolutionary track record, we know that there are roughly 3 or 4 key elements for a species to make its way towards some form of sentient success on Earth. The main one being that they need to have a long enough lifespan to see the fruit of their labor grow. That means don't worry about the creatures of the deep ocean crawling from the depths and taking over, because did you know the average lifespan of an octopus is between 3 to 5 years? And on the path towards sentience and civilization, that's a pretty bum deal. First off, there needs to be some kind of capacity for sociability. Our ancestors quickly learned that being the loner of the group didn't tend to result in any kind of continued survival. Particularly in the latter stages of our pursuit toward humanity, the ability to socially interact with other members of our species led toward a sense of shared cooperation, and with cooperation came success. Social cues and some form of expression recognition led to tools, hunting, gathering, and eventually agriculture and the dawn of civilization. That means that particularly here, pack animals such as canines and some felines and other species such as otters and beavers have an immediate advantage. Obviously, apes are also included on this list, but come on, those guys are already cheating. Next up, the ability for physical manipulation is of critical importance. The sociable path toward tool making and farming is worthless if you don't have the appendages to contribute toward force multiplication. Dexterity and motor skills are an absolute must for any current species that hopes to fill the space left behind by humanity. And again, apes already have this market pretty much cornered. However, traditional hands and fingers aren't the only requirement, as theoretically any form of extended appendage can do the trick. An elephant's trunk, even an octopus tentacle would work. The most likely candidates here though, other than the apes, are those with some form of opposable thumb. This could be anything from an opossum, a koala bear, a giant panda, a red panda, or hell, even most types of frog. Also, otters again fit into this category, and our cute hand-holding friends are quickly becoming the hot new favourite. Speaking of hot, there's perhaps another major leap that our new earthly tenants would need, and unless they've got a Perseus of their own to steal fire from the gods, the ability to strike a flint and tinder is a checkbox that needs to be ticked. You see, unless the chemical composition of our planet changed during the events of this hypothetical situation, somewhere down the line our new species is going to have to learn how to make a campfire, and that pretty much eliminates any aquatic or semi-aquatic species unless they're in the business of figuring out some other method of physical combustion. Again, this is where the apes are cornering the market, as there are already instances where bonobos can light fires with ease, albeit with butane lighters, and then fry an egg for dinner. Yeah, like I said guys, they're pretty overpowered. The fact of the matter is, if we disappeared tomorrow, our ape relatives are probably a few thousand years away from reaching a similar journey toward levels of sentience, if left enough alone. Although the particular mechanics of that are the subject matter for a future LBQ video. Spoilers. Because of that fact, pretty much all of the other contenders wouldn't have the chance to hit the parameters needed to build a civilization, and our answer quickly reaches a matter of reality. However, there is one hypothetical instance where a much smaller creature than an ape would perhaps find their way through the minefield that is evolutionary success, given enough time, of course. After the dinosaurs were wiped out, the small shrew-like rodent that previously skittered beneath the feet of the great reptilian creatures became the first mammal to step forward in a new age of evolution, eventually giving rise to every other successful land mammal of the animal kingdom. And if we put ourselves in the shoes of dinosaurs, what would we see when we look down? Ants. A species of insect belonging to the order Hymenoptera that just so happened to tick quite a few of our boxes when it comes to evolutionary success, that also seem to exhibit fascinating traits that segue many of the parameters required to become a dominant species here on Earth. Obviously, ants are small, very small, but just like that tiny shrew, evolution has a pretty successful habit of finding a way. Maybe after humanity is long gone, even after our nearest mammalian relatives gave civilization a shot, after several millennia of strange, perplexing epochs, a species that evolved from their distant ancestor, the ant, would be sat at their desk, clicking their thorax, spindled fingers against a keyboard, trying to answer this very same question. Now, that's quite a thought, isn't it?